Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well wherever you're joining us from. I know this is a highly international crowd, and my name is Ping Wang. I am the Executive Director of Techstars in Taiwan. And today we have special guests joining us from the US and Taiwan. This is a co-production with COLLAB X, and we are lucky to have the CEO and founder of COLLAB X, Stephen Chen, and he will explain that in just a second. And along with that, we also have our main presenter today, Weiting Liu, who is the founder and CEO of Codementor and ARC. And from that perspective and standpoint, as someone who has managed remote teams, he will, of course, discuss that topic. But the other thing of note, mentioning Techstars, is that Weiting is a two-time alum of both YC, which is Y Combinator, and Techstars. And he is a legend in the Taiwan entrepreneurial ecosystem. So we're very lucky to have him today. I'm excited to learn more. But this is, of course, being moderated with Stephen Chen. And so I'll hand it off to him. But just for you to know, this is the beginning of a series of founder development talks. And we'd love your thoughts, your feedback, and of course, we'd love for you to join the community and learn more about events like this. So there's a green tab that just popped up. Click on it, join our community. It's a Facebook group, but also we have a line chat and other channels as well. In fact, we have another talk specific about mentorship development, which I think is a needed thing coming on tomorrow in less than 24 hours. So lots of great events. So in any case, we'll talk about that again towards the end of this. Without further ado, let me present you Stephen Chen.
Hey guys, my name's Stephen. I'm the founder of COLLAB X, and we're a community where founders learn from expert founders through mini classes like this today. So I'll be the moderator for today. I want to cover a couple quick housekeeping items before we start. So as you guys see, there's a chat on the right-hand side of your screen. So feel free to give us a holler and let us know where you're calling in from. There will be an audience Q&A after this session. So at the bottom, you'll see an Ask a Question button. So if you'd like to get your questions in, make sure you add your questions there by clicking that button on the bottom. You could also see polls, so we'd love to hear your answers to the polls as well. And so without further ado, let's hand it over to the man of the hour. That's Weiting Liu, as you know him. As you know, he's the founder and CEO of ARC and Codementor and a remote work expert. And so we're all super excited to learn a lot from him, Weiting. So I'll hand off to Weiting. Weiting, if you could please start us off with just a quick little background bio about yourself, and then we can jump right into the slides.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Weiting from ARC here. So as Stephen has introduced me, I'm the founder and CEO of both ARC and Codementor. We've been around since 2014, and ARC was launched in summer of 2019. So the topic of remote work is quite personal to me. Well, you can say that I've been working remotely since 2006. So that's 14 years ago, right? So that was before remote was cool. And you can kind of see me as, you can kind of say that, yes, I'm like an OG in the world of remote work. And let me do a screen share first. Can you guys see my screen okay? You guys see my slides okay? Right, okay. So one of the reasons why we think we know quite a bit about the knowledge about remote work is because ARC itself is a remote hiring platform, right? So we have thousands of developers worldwide whom we have vetted. We've been connecting them with companies everywhere, right? So and also we ourselves as a company have been working remotely for quite some time now. So both at an organizational perspective and as a business level perspective, we have a lot of experiences in terms of remote work. And also because so if you go to arc.dev, you can see our what ARC's platform is about. But in addition to being a remote work platform, we also see ourselves as a remote work community. So we have created a lot of resources, some by our team members internally, some have sourced knowledge all over the web from all the domain experts of remote work and also work from home experts everywhere. So we've created resources such as remote work FAQs, such as this one. We also do have a podcast hosted by one of my colleagues, Jovian. So as the name Outside the Valley suggests, we think the world, the startup ecosystem is more than just the Silicon Valley. And this podcast is where we just go about all over the world and we interview startup leaders for them to get real about what's really like to build remote teams. And we've interviewed tons of thought leaders, including Hiten Shah, Andreas Klinger, about various topics in terms of remote work and building distributed teams. So just some quick agenda about this workshop. So I'd like to go some of the topics, include why going remote is a quite advantageous thing for us to do, some of the common objections of going remote, and what are some of the tips to do remote work well, right? Okay, so one of the biggest problems that I guess Silicon Valley companies, also companies everywhere, especially in tech hubs, that they're experiencing is a war for local talent, right? This is especially acute for Silicon Valley-based companies or New York-based companies, especially for engineering talent, right? The common problem including there's just a limited local talent supply in your zip code. So there's a lot of companies, including the Googles and Facebook and Airbnbs of the world, competing for the same talent. And that would just drive up the salaries for all the supplies, and you introduce a super long hiring process. And talents usually wouldn't tend to stay in one company that long in a tech center like that. So a lot of thought leaders seem to agree with this assessment. So for example, Andreas Klinger, he is the head of remote of AngelList. He said quite famously that building an engineering team in Silicon Valley now is mostly a liability, right? So what are some of the solutions to a problem like this is, well, why don't we try to build our teams as remotely as possible? There's a lot of good advantages for us to do that. For example, you have access to a wide global talent pool, no matter what city that you live in, like your city does not have monopoly to the world's best talent. That's probably a fact, right? So if you can increase your ability and your capability to hire great talent outside of your zip code, that can dramatically increase your advantages compared to other competitors. You can potentially find a lot of hidden gems in other talent pools in other areas, and by doing so, it will enable you to hire much faster and more with more elasticity. So here's some of the real world examples of us, like WeArc, by being a remote friendly company, it has enabled us to have so many benefits, right? So these are actually real world examples. So for example, one of our colleagues, her name is Debbie, which is her real name. She's a senior marketer with us. She's been with us for more than 4 years. And earlier last year, she just needed to move back to LA. She used to be in Taiwan, but she needed to move back to LA, right? Because we are a remote friendly company, we said, that's great. Please continue to work with us while you're based in LA, right? So had we not be a remote friendly company, we'll be losing one of our best team members just because she no longer can live in Taiwan, right? Another example, one of our senior developers, Ben, recently she just decided to move back to Tainan to spend more time with his family while continuing to work with a team, right? Another developer, she actually, so one thing about being remote friendly is that you're actually quite location agnostic, right? So for example, Ting used to live in Taiwan, but then as of February or March, she just moved to Vancouver, actually without that too many people noticing. So one day we just, oh, you know what? So many of us didn't realize one of our colleagues actually moved location, actually moved to a different continent, right? So as long as you're very productive, if your organization is very good at remote work, by being location agnostic, you can actually improve retention and improve your capability of hiring talent everywhere, right? And from the investor's perspective, I assume there's a lot of startup founders or aspiring startup founders in the audience here. From the investor's perspective, post-COVID, this is also something that we all need to think about as entrepreneurs, right? So Ed Roman, who is a Silicon Valley investor, he also recently wrote in his essay of startup investing in the age of coronavirus, he even explicitly said that they prefer startups who have a remote development team, either in Eastern Europe or Latin America, since engineers are about a third of the price of US engineers and are much easier to hire and retain, right? So a lot of investors are also taking notice, and they actually see if you are an entrepreneur based in Silicon Valley and you still insist on building local engineering teams, there are going to be investors that are going to question this decision, right? So this is something for us to start to look into. So just because as of right, I guess prior to COVID, right, going remote or not remain a personal option, personal preference. I guess post-COVID, right, there are also two options. Whether would you all just go back to normal, as in if you were against remote after COVID, you might just go back to being against remote again, or you can start to embrace remote work, right? But what are some of the top 5 stories that people tell themselves for not going remote, right? Some of the common objections include, well, our team will be less productive, it will be harder for us to communicate, and so forth. So let's just go over each and one of those, and we can see if we can address them together. So first of all, so one common objection is that, okay, our team will be less productive, right? So for example, like I wouldn't know if my team will actually be working or whether they'll be watching Netflix or playing games or not, right? So the things that, one, with the right tools, your team can be even more productive, right? So that's the first one. The second two is that I think modern management is moving towards something that's more aligned with measuring output and outcome instead of measuring input. So frameworks such as OKRs, right, recently being popularized by Google and John Doerr, they're all advocates of measuring the outputs and the outcomes, the key results of the team, rather than the sheer number of hours that the teams put in, right?
So you guys are not one of those companies that tracks clicks and screen time.
No, we're not.
For your employees.
And the things that, even if you are in the believer in those camp, there are actually tools for you to do that as well, right? So there are SaaS softwares such as Time Doctor, which I see their ads all the time on YouTube. If you are a believer that for whatever reason you really believe that you want to track how people are spending their time, there are actually tools for you to do that quite effectively, right? But just that it's kind of what kind of belief system that you're in, right? So if you believe in as long as they seem to be working hard and as long as they produce the right outcomes, you actually shouldn't care how many hours that they put in, right? As long as they produce the right key results, right? And there's a lot of like time logging software out there that can enable you to do what you like, right? Another common objection is, well, it will be harder for the team to communicate, right? Which is understandable, but I think there's the status quo working remotely now versus when I first started out, say 2006, it's a lot better, right? So there are more great software and tools that can enable you to be just almost as effective as in-office communications, right? So, for example, there's quite popular like pyramid of remote team communication tools by another company called Doist. They're one of the bigger names in the world of remote work. So there's all these different tools that can be great for different kind of communications, right? Whether asynchronous or synchronous, right? So there's actually different types of beliefs as well. So one camp, the Doist, the GitLabs, the Zapiers of the world, essentially, there are actually a lot of companies that are 100% remote, 100% fully distributed, right? They are actually strong advocates of everything should default to asynchronous communications because that's just better in the long run, right? But for the most companies, even for example, like we ARC as an organization, we are not a 100% distributed company, right? So we have 37 people. We do have an office in Taiwan, and we have a distributed team. So we are a hybrid model, which traditionally people will say it's the most challenging setup, but then we can still pull this off, right? So in our case, we do both asynchronous and synchronous communications. And the way we kind of define this is, of course, like due to time zone differences, there's just a lot of time that asynchronous communication is required, right? But I guess we are very used to communicate on Slack, even though we're in the same time zone or sometimes in the same physical office. Our team is very used to just communicate with each other using Slack first. But then I guess after one or two communications, because sometimes you want to have this one-on-one conversation in a public channel, right? So other team members can be in the loop, right? But oftentimes when a certain back and forth is going to exceed to beyond, say, 1 or 2 minutes, oftentimes one of the colleagues would just say, okay, let's hop on to a quick sync call together, just to end up with a decision as quickly as possible, right?
So that's a great point, because I think that's something that a lot of organizations struggle with. You know, like at what point do I go from synchronous to asynchronous and back? So if what I'm hearing is correct, it sounds like you're saying, you know, whenever a conversation requires a certain threshold of going back and forth, then you guys will decide to switch to a synchronous communication tool. Do you guys have like any other kind of like guidelines or kind of like benchmarks that help you decide like, hey, this is when we should switch to synchronous, or hey, this is when we should switch to asynchronous?
Right. So one thing is that information is to get remote work right, you have to make sure that everyone on the team has the same level of information, right? And that actually means that things will need to be in writing, right? Usually when things are in asynchronous mode, that's in text, i.e. in writing. And oftentimes when it's a live meeting, it is fine as long as there's going to be some kind of meeting notes or action items or summary of the synchronous meetings that's shared after the meeting ends, right? So the way we kind of see this is, by default, the information should need to be distributed among other team members. So there needs to be some kind of writings either before or after the synchronous meeting that take place. But we still believe that if more than two parties need to enter a discussion to come up with a decision, right? Synchronous one-on-one live chat is still a much faster way for people to communicate right now, right? So hop onto a quick meeting, decide as fast as possible, but at the end, just distribute the information via writing asynchronously with other team members. Another comment about asynchronous and synchronous, it's actually something that's shared by the head of remote evangelists, Andreas Klinger, as well. if something that requires innovation and creativity, like a synchronous model is probably works better. But if something that's just more of an iterative work, then asynchronous probably would work better, right? So say, for example, some kind of brainstorm meeting, right? If you're talking a brainstorm meeting, I'll say that a synchronous, you can do a hybrid version, right? But in terms of like bouncing ideas off each other, right? I think a synchronous in-person meeting format will still work a lot better in this case.
Got it. Yeah, those are great tips. So so creativity, brainstorming, move to synchronous channels. If you need more than 2 people to make a decision, move to synchronous. I thought what was interesting of what you highlight is that right after that decision is made in the synchronous meeting, share that information with the rest of the team asynchronously. So I thought that was a pretty interesting example of that hybrid. Just personal curiosity, what's your personal favorite tool? It doesn't have to be an official recommendation, but what would you say is like your personal favorite chat tool, and what's your personal favorite video conferencing tool?
Sure. I think it's an interesting debate these days. So we as a company, so we run on Slack, right? Just like all companies do. We have been very early users of Zoom, I think way back in 2013. So we have been paid users of Zoom for the past couple of years, right? But I guess lately, due to the potential security concerns of Zoom, we've also been trying out other different tools. So honestly, we've tried almost all of them, right? So we've tried Google Hangout, now called Google Meet. We've tried Skype. We've tried GoToMeeting. My suggestion is that, to my surprise, GoToMeeting and even Skype is actually quite good, honestly. Google Meet as of a week ago was not as great as I hope it will be, but I'm under the impression that Google is trying to make a big push of Google Meet right now. So I expect them to make consistent improvements. But I guess in a way, I think this is good, right? Because Zoom being this, I guess, smallish startup coming out of nowhere, now being like, I guess, a darling of Wall Street in a way. So I guess it's kind of interesting for the other industry giants to take notice. I think it's actually good in a way that just more competition can drive up the competition. So that's good.
I like that. GoToMeeting and Skype. I like the contrarian opinion.
Right. So honestly, to my surprise, Skype is actually quite good. It's a lot better than I thought. GoToMeeting is actually also comparable to, but honestly, if we were just compare everything together, in terms of user experience, my personal preference is still Zoom. It's still better. And I would probably confidently say that had Zoom not existed, I think our level of productivity would be quite low compared to versus without Zoom. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Now about meetings, right? So another common misconception is that meetings will be less effective on Zoom versus in-person meetings. So I think kind of depends on how you run the meetings. So for example, just quoting Andreas Klinger again, so some people actually say like meetings are actually just monkey patches to bad internal processes, right? But that's probably true. But the thing that people are actually saying that a lot of remote friendly or remote ready companies, in order to be remote ready, you have to actually need to get your act together in terms of internal processes. So it's actually a good forcing function for you to optimize your internal process. So I guess that's good in a way, but I guess meetings are sometimes still important to make decisions, right? So, well, I guess I'm not a personal expert in terms of running meetings, right? But we've interviewed a bunch of thought leaders who have a lot of thoughts about making meetings more effective. And my personal opinion is that running meetings on Zoom can even just be as effective, if not better, because the screen sharing feature is actually wonderful. You can actually force people to focus on one thing, and there's all these live annotation that you can put. Sometimes I actually find myself prefer, in terms of productivity, right? Zoom meetings can actually be more productive than an in-person meeting. Because, for example, for in-person meeting, sometimes you cannot really take notes on your computer, right? But for a Zoom meeting, you can just continue to stare, you can just continue to type. I actually prefer Zoom meetings a lot better than in-person meetings in terms of from the productivity perspective, right?
How do you guys handle meeting notes? Do you guys have a certain process for meeting notes at ARC?
Right. So we do, but we're not that. I mean, we do care about having action items at the end of the meetings, and we also do ask people to summarize, like what was the conclusion of the meeting, right? So if there are certain decisions that was made, so people will need to share those decisions on some public channels on Slack, and if there's any action items, there will be action items in bold and those meeting notes as well, right? So I guess meeting notes is more about, yes, summaries of decisions and action items that came out of the meetings that will need to be shared on Slack.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you.
Right. And another interesting topic is, of course, right, global remote hiring can actually reduce cost if done the right way. So because ARC is a remote hiring platform for software developers, so we actually did a pretty comprehensive comparison in terms of local salaries and remote salaries. So one thing to keep in mind, though, is oftentimes there's actually different bands of market rates, right? So for example, there's this US Silicon Valley rate in terms of software developers, right? And there's actually another remote rate of software developers. And then are the local company rates, right? So the local companies rates are actually either you're in Taiwan or you're in Argentina or you're in Eastern Europe, right? The local rate will be the lowest. But say for the developers or the talent that live in all those different countries and cities, but they speak great English, they are the so-called international talent. They're the top 5 or 10 percentile of the local talent. They will most likely demand a much higher rate, relatively speaking, compared to the local averages. So that's why there's this second, more of a global remote rate, right? So we've actually created this tool, which is essentially a remote salary explorer for software developers on ARC. You can feel free to go into that to go take a look. But just to do a quick comparison, right? So say if you're talking about a software developer in Taiwan, right? So these numbers are actually real data that we grab out of the salary explorers. So these, for the people here, these numbers are actually higher than the typical local salaries in Taiwan. But if you are if you're a company based in Silicon Valley and you're thinking about hiring remote developers, either in Latin America or Eastern Europe or in Asia, say in Taiwan, right? So assuming you're wanting to hire someone in Taiwan, the average salary for a pretty competent mid-level to senior remote developer, you're looking at probably about 53K USD on an annual basis, right? It can range from 35K to 100K per year. And if you're looking to hire someone who's quite senior, the average salary would be about 73K, right? So these kind of ranges. So say, I think the going rate for pretty good senior developers in the Silicon Valley is probably about 200K. So you're talking about a third of the typical Silicon Valley salary here, right? Another issue is that, say, there's a lot of companies who might be interested in building a global team or hire one or two developers or hire one or two customer support people here and there in different countries. But hiring remotely can be quite complicated or challenging if you're not very familiar with all of these compliance issues, right? So it's actually not that very complicated. So for example, one might feel challenged, okay, if I want to hire essentially a stranger on the internet who's based in Poland or who's based in Singapore, who's based in Taiwan, how exactly do I make the employment happen, right? So right now, there are usually 3 options that you can go into, right? So of course, right, with all the compliance issue in mind, the most compliant version is one, you just go to the local region, say Taiwan, and you open a local subsidiary there, which is the most time consuming and that costs the most money. But it will probably be the right thing to do if the plan is to actually build a real team, say a 2 to 20 person team in Taiwan or in Poland or in other places. That's probably the right thing for you to do if you plan to have a long-term investment view in that region. The second one is to hire a PEO. Essentially, you will just hire another company that would employ the local talent on your behalf. So you'll still need to pay all the health insurance, the benefits, everything, plus a markup to the organization who's going to employ your employees on your behalf, right? So the advantage is that it's very convenient, but it's going to be quite costly for you as well. But there's actually a lot of startups that are trying to tackle this issue. So it's going to be much easier going forward. The third one is probably the most straightforward and most common approach is you would just hire these local talent as international contractors of your, say, US-based entity, right? So this is actually what the most remote companies are doing right now. So by default, say, if you're a company based in San Francisco or LA, you want to hire 1 or 2 developers in Taiwan, you may want to eventually build a team in Taiwan, but you haven't done that before, so you're not very sure. So usually one thing that we'll recommend people to do is to just hire the first 1 or 2 person as remote contractors, right? So it's a standard, it's not 1099, I think it's WABN, and you just wire transfer, sign a remote work agreement, and then you just pay them via, say, TransferWise or PayPal or wire transfer or Payoneer. There's a lot of payment processor services that you can use. But something that we will recommend is after, say, if you have a team of 20 scattered across 15 countries, right? That's probably something that we would recommend you to do. But then once you start to have a pretty solid concentration in one single city, say for example in Taiwan, then we'll probably recommend you to either work with a PEO or start to consider building your own local entity, because that's still like the more compliant thing for you to do, right? So there's a lot of startups that are trying to create new interesting services in this domain, because if you think about this, right, remote full-time employment internationally at a small scale is still a relatively new thing for people to do, right? So for example, when I say small, so like 10 years ago, it's actually not quite common for companies to employ one single employee in another country, but say 20 different countries, right? But now, as remote work becomes more and more mainstream, this will become a more mainstream use case. So that's why there's a lot of startups trying to innovate in this domain. Okay, so to borrow Zapier, which is another well-known remote work company. So in order to make remote work successful, there are usually three important ingredients: the team, the tools, and also the process. So in terms of the team, I guess hiring well is very critical, of course, for both non-remote teams and remote teams as well. But for remote team members, there are just certain type of persona that would just be better suited for remote work, right? So for example, we as a company, we also try to follow these guidelines, right? Hire those who default to action, right? Hire people who you can trust, and also trust those you hire, and trust people who can write. So writing is actually a very important asynchronous communication skills, which is critical in terms of remote work, right? So hire people who can communicate well asynchronously, i.e. write, right? As well as it's actually not obvious, but it's always like you want to hire people who are okay without a social workplace, right? So I guess this whole like shelter in place can be actually a good test for people to see, like, now imagine doing this for the next 5 years, like how happy would you be, right? So hire people who are okay without daily real face-to-face interaction with other colleagues. I understand this might not be the right thing to do that might be the most desirable thing to do for everybody. But of course, there's also ways for you to get around it. So for example, remote work does not have to be working from home, right? So there's a lot of companies, well-known companies, who have team members located everywhere. They actually do allocate budgets for team members to work at co-working spaces, right? Because sometimes people have kids, or they just don't, like, their homes are not ideal office environments, right? So working remotely does not have to be working from home with crying babies crawling over you, right? Yeah. And another thing is to tools that can enable your team, right? So there's a lot of remote work tool matrices such as this one that you can just Google on the internet for all these different purposes, right? So for example, I guess one common objection about working remotely is what about whiteboarding, right? And all those other like in-person interactions that people are used to. But you know what? There are actually quite a few like whiteboarding tools out there that are actually quite good, and it's going to become better over time, right? So there's all these different areas of innovation that are popping up. So we fully expect this ecosystem of remote work related tools to continue to thrive. So there's the tools. So I guess the gap between remote work versus in-person work has already been shrinking, like compared to when I first started working remotely back in 2006, right? At that time, I remember Skype was the only thing that we used, right? So I text chat via Skype, I audio chatted via Skype. So I don't recall using video chat at all. So I guess that wasn't really a thing back then, right? So things I've never thought about what you can do screen share like with super crisp resolution, right? This was not possible back in the days, right? So there's just going to be a lot of very interesting innovations coming out of this as remote work becoming more mainstream, right? So there's just
I'm gonna put you on the spot again. What's your favorite whiteboarding tool? Personal favorite?
So there's one called Miro, M-I-R-O, that our team seems to be using quite a lot, right?
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
So there's going to be there's a lot of things, right? And also processes. Speaking to, I'm just going to. So one of our team's favorite tool is Notion. I'm going to share more about that later. as well. So there's all these different processes that we can build to maximize the productivity for remote teams, right? So for example, like it would be great if the team can document everything in one place in a collaboration workspace, right? We can optimize for single player mode. I'll just explain all this in a second. So for example, building a solid process or document everything equates to making sure all the information can be evenly distributed across the entire organization, right? Communication, right? And making sure that all the information can be accessible to team members all over the world, right? So we use Notion. Apparently, we're big fans of Notion. I say apparently because I guess I used to hate Notion quite a lot. To be honest with you, by the way, we're also early users of Notion, right? So we are early adopters of almost every new innovations in this space, right? When it first came out, I absolutely hated it, right? There are certain things I just cannot be used to, but most of my team members seem to love it quite a lot, and I guess they're all like super heavy users. There's a lot of serious Notion food that you can do. So growingly, that I've become used. The more I got used to it, the more I enjoyed it more as well. And now it's like this $2 billion company now. So it's awesome, right? So this is just like an awesome. People say it's kind of like a cousin to Slack. So Slack is more great for, say, synchronous chat of some kind, announcement of some kind. But for anything that's almost like a knowledge base of some sort, we default everything to Notion, right?
Basically, almost using it as like a company wiki.
Yes.
And I think for those who are, because I myself, was also hesitant to kind of adopt Notion for a lot of different reasons. But I think something that we could all use is even just Google Docs, like the Google Sheets, Google Docs. Everyone knows how to use that. Personally, I've used it on projects where you just have a single Google Doc for all of your meetings. So anyone who misses the meeting, or if you just forget, you can always go back to one single place and like, all right, the key stuff is in there. So
yes.
If you're intimidated by Notion or even things like Roam Research, you could always default back to Google Docs.
Yeah. I've just started to use Roam Research myself as well.
That's a whole new one.
Yeah, I was going to make some comment. I think it's going to be a tangent. So okay.
Yeah, Roam Cole.
Sorry, it seems that we're running out of time. So another interesting thing is to create a thing called single player mode. I guess this is more related to, especially for organizations with a lot of team members across different time zones. So oftentimes, a certain team members will actually find themselves like being unable to seek help if they need to in real time because other team members will be sleeping during certain hours, right? So the importance of creating this single player mode will be quite critical, right? So for example, if you can create a process that can avoid unneeded interdependencies, that can allow more autonomy, right? So here are some of the examples, right? So for example, if there's certain design that's missing and they just try to use standard components, right? So all these different rules that you can start to align the teams with so that essentially team members don't need to wait for other team members to wake up to get things done. That's basically what this all comes down to. So this one is also interesting, right? So transparency improves remote collaboration. So our team actually wrote an interesting blog post about this, about like the Slack emojis being a secret weapon to our team's remote collaboration. So what that means is that we actually do, so this is actually real, right? This is actually a real, directory of emojis that we use internally in terms of Slack communication, right? So the things that on a typical Slack message, oftentimes it might not be crystal clear for the team members to know what your intent of this message is and what exactly you're looking for, right? So if you can have this dictionary of emojis, of what certain emoji means, like what exactly are you looking for? For example, if you really want to get your team's opinions or ideas about something, you actually add like this brain icon in the beginning of the Slack message, so people will actually know that actions are required, right? And so that comes and also like when you are reacting to other people's message, there are also other I guess vocabulary of emojis that our team has created. So we find this super effective. It's actually a fun thing to keep team morale as well.
This is like my favorite hack that I've seen in a really long time, because I have that problem where I'm scrolling through hundreds of Slack messages and it's just really difficult to get through it all. But this is cool, like where I could just look at the emojis and kind of get an idea of what this message is about. So this is awesome. I'm definitely gonna do this myself.
Right. And to be honest with you, this is quite especially important, I guess, when the teams becomes bigger, I guess, for founders or C-level, like for founders like myself, right? Okay, I can probably do this better, but oftentimes, sometimes I would sometimes make a casual comment. I would casually ask something on Slack, right? But oftentimes your team members wouldn't know that you're only casually asking about something, right? So you'll be more effective for the other team members to, you know what, I'm just saying this as a FYI, right? Right. So like a way for the team to know the intent of your questions, that would be super productive and very helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like so many times you're reading Slack messages and I'm trying to mind read the intent of the person, but this, like, the emojis make it super explicit. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so to wrapping this up, right? So yes, there are still challenges to work remotely, but actually, I honestly don't think there are limiting factors. There's actually a lot of very successful companies that are 100% remote, right? GitLab is this 100% remotely distributed company. They're going to be IPO soon. And I guess prior to COVID, I was thinking, okay, by the time GitLab goes IPO in 2020, they're going to bring remote work to mainstream, right? But then COVID came and then everything suddenly become accelerated. But there are this real live examples of, yes, you can actually create remote work is actually solid. All the infrastructure for remote work is there. So it's actually possible for companies to be so successful that they can become a billion-dollar company without a single office, with people all over various different time zones. So it's definitely possible, and all the tools are there. So you just need to learn all these, I guess, the soft skills and the processes to make this happen, right? That's it. And I guess the last step is, well, actually curious. So if you can please go to this bit.ly link. So we're actually curious about, so we do surveys all the time about remote work, remote hiring. So if you can help us learn more about your sentiment about remote work before and after COVID, I think that'll be very interesting to us. And also bonus, because we're a remote hiring platform for software developers, if you are interested, we'll be happy to do like a customized cost analysis for your future remote team for you. So feel free to take a look, and yeah, happy to take any questions you have. Thank you.
Yeah, and so if you guys want to click that link, there's that green button underneath the video screen. So if you click that green button, it'll take you directly to the survey. Cool. So thank you, Weiting. Before we jump to the audience Q&A, I just want to ask kind of like just your kind of like number one big secret. So what would your number one secret be for remote workers to achieve peak efficiency, just be efficient working from home or remotely?
Honestly, like on an individual level, it's actually you need to be it sounds very basic, but you have to be very comfortable with the environment that you work in, right? So if you're working from home, right, you probably need to find somewhere that's quiet and that you can really work, right? So again, remote work does not equate to working from home, like for various different reasons, right? But you can still work comfortably at home. It's possible, but just to know that all these world-class remote, 100% remote distributed companies, right? Not all of them on an individual level basis work from home, right? So, okay, personally, for example, so I'm in Taiwan right now, but I also used to split my time between Taiwan and the Bay Area, right? So whenever I was in the Bay Area, I'll be working from home, like remotely collaborate with my team in Taiwan and elsewhere, right? But the things that I have a 4-year-old, right? When the 4-year-old was 1-year-old and she was at home, it was extremely painful for me to work from home in Sunnyvale, right? So I tried to do that for a while. I realized, okay, that's actually no longer possible. So what I did was actually, I just went out and get myself a pass to a local co-working space because that's super important for me, right? So when creating a comfortable, noise-free environment at home is no longer possible because that's so critical. I just decided to, okay, I still need to make that happen. So I just get myself a co-working space, right? So
that's a good one. Yeah.
Right. So I guess now with more and more technology, there's great noise cancellation headphones. Yeah. There's like software solutions. I think Crisp.ai that kind of helps you cancel like background noises. There's just more and more tools, right? But I guess my fundamental advices are just try to create this environment where you can just be yourself, put yourself in the flow of being very productive.
And what if we kind of flip that question? So now you're managing a remote team. What would you say is like your number one secret for managing remote teams?
Right. Like communication is super important. And people say that you almost want to over communicate all the time, right? Both synchronously and also asynchronously. So just sometimes I would find myself, I probably need to do this more often, but just great for you to just repeat yourself beyond how you imagine. That's also important. And also, I think one of the biggest challenge, honestly, I think productivity is actually not the biggest challenge to me. I think the biggest challenge in terms of working remotely is actually building this human connection with your team members. Honestly, I think that's building the right culture where team members like each other. I guess for most organizations, it's actually one of the top priorities, right? It's actually hard for, I guess humans still prefer to meet face to face, right? So I guess when I said like Zoom meeting is actually great in terms of productivity, but what I didn't say was actually from the perspective of building personal relationships. Like for example, like Steve, I still prefer to sit down at a coffee shop or at a bar with you to chat with you over beer or coffee or tea compared to like Zoom. Like a happy hour over Zoom is just not the same. Right?
Absolutely.
Right. So that's why all these world-class remote companies, say Zapier's, GitLab, all those guys, they still host like face-to-face meetings, like a company-wide retreat, like once every 6 months or something like that, because they believe that face-to-face meetings is still critical.
I'm glad you touched on that point because that's actually like our top voted question. So you might have answered it, but I'll just repeat the question anyways. So this question from Tyler is, what are the effective ways to maintain team cohesion while working from home every day?
Right. Yeah. So good question. So we've also been doing a lot of exercises on this, right? So I guess the old answer was, or still try to create opportunities for people to meet face to face. But with COVID, that's no longer possible. How do you do that, right? So one way is that one of our thing that our HR team has done quite well is we create a lot of remote team bonding opportunities. For example, we create this Slack channel literally called water cooler. So we create this channel called water cooler. So for people to either asynchronously add whatever, like jokes, interesting things that stumble on the internet. And also sometimes we'll just purposely create, okay, anyone who are free in the next 5 minutes, feel free to join this game that we created, right? Or anyone who wants to who are free and want to just chat quickly for 5 minutes, feel free to join this Zoom room, right? So we're very intentful in terms of creating, I guess, social bonding opportunities from time to time.
Those are great. I've also heard like some companies talk about, they might reserve the first couple minutes of a meeting just for kind of general small talk banter, just to kind of keep that going. I think this is kind of related. I'm jumping down to Jim's question just because this is kind of on a similar related topic. So his question is, deeper connectedness and how to strengthen culture. So maybe it's the same answer, but I would like to hear your thoughts specifically from the culture perspective.
Right. I think still mostly the same answer, but I guess once a team becomes remote, there's going to be cultural differences, right? So for example, we have team members in Argentina, Mexico, US, Canada, and Singapore, with people all over the place, right? So, and we have 30 team members in Taiwan, right? So, I guess what I'm trying to get about is like, we can say like the internet culture is actually like the default, like common language that we use. I guess all those memes is actually like a great common denominator that our team has been using in terms of getting internet jokes. Yeah, I love you there. So I think the water cooler channel is still like our default answers to this, and I guess internet jokes can be quite transcendent.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's definitely internet memes that people recognize across cultures. Cool, let's move it on. So this question is from Kelly. How to avoid missing important information?
Right. This is one thing that my team has been thinking about as well, right? So we still do have regular synchronous all hands meetings that we just make sure that a certain key company milestones or key stats or key company strategic decisions will not be lost, right? So, and we'll actually record all of them and put them into Notion so that anyone who missed any of those can still go back so that they don't miss any critical updates. And I guess we just try to create this growing knowledge base on Notion with all these different information. So I think GitLab is actually a good example of this because they default everything to asynchronous, right? So they actually just, the way they run their companies is effectively running a huge open source project, right? Almost everything is open source. So if you go to GitLab, there's actually this playbook. I think it's called playbook. It's like an open directory of all the best practices and the internal processes of GitLab, right? So everything is written down, right? So nothing can be missed, right? You almost want to, so that's like a great examples of trying to put everything in writing as much as possible, because if everything that's being conveyed verbally, most likely there will be team members that will not going to get that. So we just try to make sure that things get written down as much as possible.
Makes sense. It's the most, I guess, equitable and fair to everyone across time zones and countries. Cool, so moving on. This question is from Jeff Lai, my former neighbor. Hey, Jeff. The question is, you have team members working in very far time zones across Canada, US, Taiwan. what challenges did you encounter working across these time zones, and what tips do you have for teams?
Right. So great question. So honestly, I personally, I think the single biggest challenge, I guess, other than like building a culture, the single biggest challenge for remote work is actually cross time zones, right? To be honest with you, right? So the reason being is still that there are still way fewer organizations who are good at asynchronous communications than synchronous communications, right? So organizations such as GitLab, they have probably perfected their craft of communicating asynchronously, right? So that's great for them, but I would say 99% of the communication of the organizations out there are not like that, right? So I mean, I think we are relatively good at asynchronous communications compared to the average organizations, but honestly, we still kind of default a lot of our decision-making process in synchronous live meetings, essentially, right? So I guess the way we do this is for example, we still we try to utilize the overlap hours very effectively. So we said that, okay, US and California, I guess morning Taiwan time will still be acceptable for the team members in the US. So we just make sure that we still get the meetings, we still allocate like 1 or 2 hours just to make sure that any discussion that requires synchronous meetings can be done during those hours, right? And sometimes we'll just also deliberately make sure that before the team members go to sleep, we'll just deliberately also ask them, hey, is there anything else that you need from us, or vice versa, before the team members went offline, right? So I think it can be challenging for people, but I think this takes some time to get used to, because I guess the more continent your team members are across, I guess the more difficult. I guess the ultimate solution is to get better in terms of asynchronous communication. But in the meantime, just still try to get overlap hours and make sure that they're as productive as possible.
Yeah, I think this does tie back to the earlier point you made about, making sure those meetings are as quick and productive as possible, because you might only have 1 or 2 hours of overlap time, right? So you need those meetings to be super to the point, quick, to where everyone can walk away and know exactly what they need to do.
Right. So it's the equivalent of doing a daily stand-up, right?
Yeah.
And you can turn this into an advantage even. So I guess things can be sequentially done because team members work almost on an entire 24-hour shift.
Yeah. I've had situations where, it's great because during the day you have deep work, quiet time to work. And then you might have 1 or 2 hours where you might have to sync, but the rest of the day you could spend it on deep work. So
yes. Speaking of deep work, so I honestly I actually find myself like when I was based in Silicon Valley more often, like I sometimes just like find myself working in a completely different hours than my team in Taiwan, right? Like during those quiet out like daytime US. That's the time when I find myself to be the most productive in terms of strategic thinking, because there's no Slack messages bothering you about, hey, can you help me do this? Can you help me do that?
Yeah, absolutely. You should definitely allocate time for deep work.
Yes.
Cool. So this next question is from Zoe. Hey, Zoe. How to encourage remote team members to practice the culture of writing and documentation? That's something that you hammered home a couple of times. You really want to document and write things down. How do you kind of encourage that culture of writing?
That's a good question. I guess the way we do it, by having more team members do this more often, by demonstrating that, like just by trying to make this as a default way of communicating, right? So usually, I guess we'll say, like this happened in a bunch of all hands, right? So I will announce something. I'll just say, please refer to this doc that we have created, right? And this elaborately written doc by one of our team members, right? So we set like the expectations there. So that's good. Yeah. So I'll say probably it's I think nothing can be done overnight, right? But as long as you keep on doing this, and by default, I guess you will happen. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Yep. Set the expectation. Keep doing it. Cool. This next question is from Leon. What are the necessary adjustments that a company needs to do in order to adapt to remote working? So I'm assuming he's talking about the scenario where a company is in person and they're adapting to moving remote.
It kind of depends on. Are the team members in the same city? They're just like working remotely temporarily, or it kind of depends on.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Leon is able to add that in the chat or not. But I guess for our purposes, maybe we could just assume. Yeah, for now we could probably just assume that they are in the same city, and then now for whatever reason the company is now moving to remote. Like, what are some adjustments they need to make?
Right. So I still think, assuming they're in the same cities, right? So maybe for example, I think the concept of daily stand-ups is quite effective, right? I guess sometimes when people are I would imagine one of the biggest fear of companies working remotely is that you used to see people, you can see people in the office, you can say hi to them, and all of a sudden you don't know, and you actually don't know whether people have started working or not, right? So one way to quickly, so it's maybe just do like a daily checking, maybe in the form of daily stand-up if you have not done that already. That can be a great way to set the tone. So start the day with a daily stand-up, and then throughout the day, if you want, you can also do a end of the day check-in with the other team members as well, right? And then just like what I said before, right? Slack message, but feel free to jump into quick synchronous short discussions as you see fit.
I think this is actually kind of related to the next question from David. I guess David's question is more on the flip side of it, where what do you think is the biggest obstacle to go from in-office, in-person to remote?
Yeah, what was interesting, though, we've actually done surveys internally for our team members. So what happened was actually, yes, we are a remote-friendly company, but we also used to have an office. Well, we do have an office in Taiwan, right? But the things that prior to COVID, we've actually been running several remote work experiment and remote work exercise, because after all, we're a remote hiring platform with an office, right? So prior to COVID, we've been asking team members to work remotely, first on a one day, like Wednesdays every week, and then we gradually changed that to working remotely. So we graduated from a remote day to remote weeks, right? And we've done like constant surveys. I guess some common obstacles, the biggest one is probably like the feeling of loneliness. It's real for companies, for team members who work remotely. Even though for like the sense of connection, meeting face to face versus without it, it's actually quite big, right? So I would say that's probably like the biggest obstacle. And the way to deal with it is either you can find time to meet face to face from time to time, or the water cooler channel, all these things that we've talked about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. You do have to put a little bit more effort for those kinds of connection type things. Cool. So we're getting to our last stretch. All right. So this question is from Frank. How do we find remote work that we actually want?
Yes, there are an increasing number of remote work related jobs. So you can go to weworkremotely.com, and there's just a bunch, right? We work remotely, remoteok.io. I think AngelList has like a remote section that's growing. It kind of depends on what your profession is. And if you're a software developer, you can come to ARC. we can connect you with great remote opportunities, both full-time, permanent, and contract work as well.
Awesome. All right, this next question is from Luke. Hey, Luke, what are some tips on an individual basis to be more effective while working remote?
Right. Over communicate. So again, asynchronous communication is super, super important, right? So if you can pride yourself to being an excellent asynchronous communicator, there's a difference between a good Slack message versus a bad Slack message, right? And the worst thing is that and there's actually, you can tell whether someone is a diligent Slack responder versus not. So there's actually a few colleagues that would, for example, they would just miss Slack messages. Like, I'm probably one of the offenders because I get so many Slack messages. But actually, if you are extremely diligent at responding to people's Slack messages, it's actually a good evidence of being a solid remote communicators. And try to be a strong asynchronous communicator. That's what I would say.
Makes sense. Cool. So this last one is from, I apologize if I say it wrong, Satupi. How do labor laws work with remote work? Typically, most businesses have labor insurance in case something happens in the workplace. Does that cover in the scenario when something happens while working at home?
Good question. I'm actually not very familiar with this particular question. But I guess if we're talking about hiring remotely, those I've previously covered some of the methods, like setting up local entities, hiring as remote contractors. But to be honest, I'm not that familiar with the labor insurance. So maybe you're right. Maybe think about at this time when when someone normally works in an office in San Francisco and suddenly works remotely at their home, what would low labor insurance? I'm honestly not familiar with that.
I think honestly, it depends on jurisdiction, right? Like even in the United States, like California treats contractors different than the other 49 states. So I think it's going to really come down to your particular geographic jurisdiction. Cool. So I think that's all of our questions. So thank you for answering the questions. We went a little bit over. I hope you guys don't mind that we went a little bit over. This is like some great stuff from you, Weiting. So appreciate it. Any last words from you? Any parting advice or any last thoughts that you'd like to share?
I just think that remote work is going to be a big part of how we work in the future, right? So because we're all entrepreneurs, we're either like active entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, I think it'll be, if we can be as remote ready as we can, that'll be extremely helpful to our future endeavors. So good luck.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, the world is moving remote, so being remote ready makes sense. So cool. Again, thank you, Weiting. So I'll just talk a little bit about next steps real quick. So guys, you will get an email with the link to this broadcast, so you will be able to watch the entire video in its entirety. So just be on the lookout for that video with the video replay link, contact information, etc. And the other thing I would add is highly encourage you guys to take at least one takeaway from this and put it into action. Like Weiting shared a lot with us today, so would definitely encourage you guys to take one thing that you guys thought was interesting and try to apply that to your day-to-day life. So thanks again, Weiting. Again, my name's Steven from COLLAB X, and so I'll hand off to Ping to take it on home for us.
Thank you very much, guys. I hope you guys all enjoyed it as much as I did. I think this was fantastic, and I particularly loved also the audience participation, asking so many questions, which is what took us a little bit of overtime, but I think it was well worth it. I also love the comments on the side, and I share the opinion that, man, you guys look awesome up there. Great haircuts in the age of quarantine as well. But also, of course, the advice was amazing. And I hope this is the beginning of many, and I know that Stephen, you and I have also planned some other talks. So I encourage everyone, again, to sign up not only for this, but also for our community. And in fact, speaking about future events, I'll just show you that we are going to have another talk tomorrow morning, Taipei time again, and this is on the subject of mentorship, and this is featuring Dave Cohen, actually, who is the co-founder of Techstars. And again, Weiting here would know all about Techstars as an alum of both YC and Techstars, which is fantastic. Now, on that topic, I know this was brought to you partly through Stephen's effort at COLLAB X and in conjunction with our project, which is Techstars in Taiwan Ecosystem Development Program. So this is actually a combination of programming throughout Techstars that includes a lot of the community programming, whether it be Startup Weekend, Startup Week, Startup Digest, etc., as well as some of the accelerator methodologies. So we bring you regular speakers throughout the Techstars universe, but also engage the broader community as well. So in that sense, if anyone else has recommendations or thoughts or additional topics that they want to discuss or want to become a speaker, please contact one of us or contact the Techstars in Taiwan team as well. So look out for all that information in the follow-up email and survey that is coming up next. But with that, once again, let's thank Weiting and Stephen and everyone that came out today. So this will be available online as well, too. So thank you again.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.